The Master is one of the most tragic villains in the entire Fallout franchise because he wasn't born evil. He was a brilliant scientist who genuinely believed he was saving humanity from extinction, only to discover too late that his solution would actually doom the human race forever. So in this video, I'm going to explain exactly how Richard Grey transformed from a compassionate explorer trying to help rebuild civilization into a horrific mutant entity who created an army of super mutants to forcibly evolve all of humanity. But first, we need some context. In 2077, the Great War lasted exactly 2 hours. Nuclear weapons fell across the entire world, turning thriving cities into radioactive wastelands and killing billions of people in the initial blasts and subsequent fallout. The few survivors either made it into underground vaults built by Vault-Tec Corporation, or struggled to survive in the irradiated wastelands that remained. But before the bombs fell, the United States government had been conducting secret experiments with something called FEV, the Forced Evolutionary Virus. FEV was designed to create super soldiers who could survive chemical and biological attacks, while possessing enhanced strength, durability, and resistance to radiation. The program was housed at a military base called Mariposa, where scientists subjected prisoners and volunteers to FEV exposure with mixed and often horrific results. When the bombs dropped, Mariposa was abandoned, its research left behind in sealed underground laboratories that would remain hidden for decades. Richard Grey was born sometime before the war, growing up in the harsh wasteland where every day was a struggle for survival. Unlike many wastelanders who focused only on surviving day to day, Richard was curious about the old world and driven by a genuine desire to help humanity recover from the nuclear apocalypse. He became an explorer and scientist, searching pre-war ruins for technology and knowledge that could help rebuild civilization. Around 2102, Richard joined a group of explorers who were investigating rumours of a hidden military installation that might contain useful pre-war technology. The installation was Mariposa. Richard and his team discovered the facility was largely intact. They found weapons, armour, and most importantly, research terminals containing data about the FEV experiment. Richard was fascinated by what he read about FEV's potential to enhance human capabilities and create immunity to radiation, but his fascination would prove to be his first critical mistake. While exploring deeper into the facility, Richard's team triggered a security system that had remained active for over 20 years. Automated turrets opened fire, killing several team members and scattering the survivors. In the chaos, Richard fell into one of FEV's containment vats, plunging into the vicious green liquid that contained concentrated samples of the virus. The rest of his team fled Mariposa, assuming Richard had died in the accident. They were wrong. Richard Grey spent days submerged in the FEV vat, kept alive by the virus as it transformed his body at the cellular level. His body started to break down and rebuild itself, melting into the vat while simultaneously absorbing and integrating with other organisms that had fallen into the containment system over the decades. The pain was unimaginable, lasting for weeks as his nervous system remained conscious throughout the transformation. When Richard finally pulled himself from the vat, he was no longer entirely human. His body had become a grotesque mass of mutated flesh, with multiple faces and body parts melded together into a single organism. But something far stranger had happened to his mind. The FEV hadn't just mutated his body, it had expanded his consciousness, allowing him to absorb and integrate the thoughts and memories of every organism he'd merged with, eventually calling itself the Master. Despite his horrific transformation, the Master retained Richard Grey's core motivation, saving humanity, but his expanded consciousness had given him a new perspective that he believed justified extreme measures. He looked at the wasteland and saw humanity struggling to survive, dying from radiation, starvation, disease, and violence. He saw communities constantly at war, unable to rebuild because they were too busy fighting over scarce resources. And so he became convinced that baseline humanity was simply too weak, too fragile, and too divided to ever recover from the nuclear apocalypse. The Master spent the next several years studying the FEV research data in Mariposa's computers, learning how to control and refine the transformation process. He discovered that with the right techniques, he could create super mutants, massively enhanced humans who were nearly immune to radiation, incredibly strong, highly resistant to damage, and freed from the petty concerns that divided wasteland communities. And if he could transform all of humanity into super mutants, he could create what he called the Unity, a peaceful civilization where everyone was too powerful to fear starvation or violence, and where humanity could finally rebuild. Around 2155, the Master began implementing his plan. He started capturing wastelanders and forcibly exposing them to FEV, creating the first generation of super mutants. The process didn't work perfectly on everyone. Many subjects died or became mindless monsters, but those who survived with the intelligence intact became loyal to the Master, seeing him as their creator and believing in his vision of unity. The Master established his base in the ruins of a pre-war military facility called the Cathedral in what used to be Los Angeles, hiding his true nature behind a religious cult that worshipped him as a divine figure. Over the next several decades, the Master built a substantial army of super mutants. He sent them across the wasteland to capture more humans for transformation, targeting isolated settlements and caravan routes where disappearances would be noticed slowly. The Master was patient and strategic, building his forces gradually while keeping his true plans hidden from the broader wasteland. His super mutants were disciplined and intelligent, far more organised than typical wasteland raiders, making them extremely effective at capturing targets alive. By 2161, the Master controlled hundreds of super mutants and was preparing for the final phase of his plan, a coordinated assault on the major settlements of Southern California. Within a generation, all of humanity would be transformed into the Unity, and the petty conflicts that plagued the wasteland would finally end. But the Master's plan had a fatal flaw that he didn't discover until it was too late. A wanderer from Vault 13, known as the Vault Dweller, had been tracking the super mutant kidnappings while searching for a way to save their own community. The Vault Dweller infiltrated the Master's cathedral, fighting through his super mutant guards and eventually confronting the Master directly in a subterranean chamber. What happened next would destroy everything the Master had worked towards for 50 years. The Vault Dweller presented the Master with evidence from his own research terminals, data that the Master had somehow overlooked or ignored during his decades of planning. Super mutants were sterile. The FEV transformation process destroyed reproductive capability in every subject, which meant that the Unity couldn't reproduce, couldn't create new generations, couldn't actually continue humanity's existence. The Master's plan to save humanity by transforming everyone into super mutants would actually end humanity within a single generation. Ironic, right? The revelation shattered the Master's certainty. Learning that his plan was fundamentally flawed, that all the pain and death had been for nothing, broke something essential in the Master's collective consciousness. Different aspects of his fractured psyche began arguing with each other, some refusing to believe the evidence, others overwhelmed by guilt and despair. Depending on how the confrontation played out, the Master either initiated the cathedral's self-destruction sequence, choosing to end his existence rather than continue with a plan he knew was now doomed, or he was killed fighting the Vault Dweller in a desperate attempt to deny the truth. Either way, the Master's death marked the end of the Unity movement. Without his leadership and psychic influence, the super mutant army fragmented into scattered war bands, most eventually leaving California to search for purpose elsewhere in the wasteland. The Master's legacy is complicated and tragic. On one hand, he was responsible for the deaths and forcible transformations of thousands of wastelanders who never asked to become super mutants. He destroyed communities, separated families, and inflicted unimaginable suffering in pursuit of his vision. Many of the super mutants he created struggled with identity issues and psychological trauma from their forced transformation. Those who retain their intelligence often struggle with the knowledge that they were created by a well-intentioned monster who doomed them to exist as the last generation of a failed evolutionary experiment. Some super mutants spent decades searching for a cure for their sterility, hoping to prove that the Master's vision wasn't completely hopeless. Others rejected the Unity philosophy entirely, choosing to live as individuals rather than as part of a collective. In the end, The Master represents one of the wasteland's greatest tragedies. A genuinely good person transformed into a monster not by malice, but by the conviction that he alone understood what humanity needed to survive.